know about Star Wars.
Okay, it is 5 o'clock. We are going to start our workshop, and I've already been asked a question about, during the workshop, if there's any questions that want to be asked. The process is going to be, on the 3 minutes that you're allotted on public speaking, just submit your name and the topic you want to ask about, because the workshop is our workshop and we're getting a report. Everybody clear on that? Okay. All right, I'll call the roll for the workshop, please.
Good evening, Vice Mayor Castillo.
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
Commissioner Schechter.
Here.
Commissioner Seipel. Mayor Ordus.
Here.
City Manager Dodge.
Here.
City Attorney Gorin.
Here.
Welcome.
Thank you all. Okay, let's get ready to our workshop. City Attorney, City Manager.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Before we get started, I've asked our Commission Auditor to come forward and to make a brief introduction, since it was their organization that secured for us the independent consultant to provide this report for you.
Good evening, sir. I'll get you right there, podium. Go ahead. Press that to speak. There you go.
Good evening. So just as a recap, back in April, we were tasked with the item to independently select a firm to help the city perform an evaluation and assessment of the water quality here in the city of Pembroke Pines. Our firm took that task on. We performed the due diligence that was necessary, contacted several firms, spoke to the individuals that would be performing the work, confirmed with them via the phone conversation we had that they were independent of the city, and then based on all of that information, our firm selected two firms, one that we thought was the most notable selection for the process, and then an alternate firm, just in case the negotiations did not proceed accordingly on the first firm we selected. Luckily for the selection we made, the city was able to negotiate the contract with the firm selected, which was Jacobs Engineering Group, and on April 19th, they entered into an agreement with them via the signed engagement letter that laid out the scope of those tasks. Then in May, June, and July, they performed that work, ultimately issuing their final report just last week on July 25th. And today, obviously, is the formal presentation of that issued report from last week. It came to our attention today via public release from Jacobs Engineering Group that they had entered into an acquisition agreement to acquire CH2M, which everyone here is aware maintains the city's water system. Now, when we became aware of that information, which was this morning via the press release from the company, we contacted each of the members of this commission individually to make them aware of that information as well. And subsequently, we contacted the two individuals involved on the process report that was performed by Jacobs Engineering, Mr. Rudy Fernandez and Dr. Chandra Mysore, who are both here in attendance today. We had a conversation with each of those individuals and asked them directly if they had any knowledge of this particular acquisition prior to the announcement today. Via those conversations that we had on the phone this afternoon, neither of them were aware of this acquisition that was in the process of going on at the time that they were engaged, nor through the time that they issued their report last week. They further confirmed to me that it is their company's policy not to announce these types of potential acquisitions via any type of internal communication until the acquisition is consummated. So they received an email from their CEO this morning indicating the acquisition took place. The email also indicated, which is customary in certain acquisitions involving publicly traded companies, that the two entities would operate as completely independent companies for the next 90 days pending SEC approval of this particular acquisition. So that is where we stand today. Both of these individuals are here in attendance. Dr. Chandra Mysore is available here for the presentation of that report, but that is a little background information on what has come to light literally this morning. there any questions for
No.
me before I step aside?
We're ready for the presentation.
Okay.
Mayor, I have a question for the
Who
Commissioner.
said that?
Mayor.
Commissioner Schwartz? Go ahead.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Commissioner. How are you?
Good. I appreciate the phone call today. Just a quick Google search on March. In March, there was a article, Shell hands out global engineering services deal to CH2M. So it's been going on for prior to April 19th, as far as potential merger or financial acquisitions, that sort of thing. The individuals that prepared the report, are they the ones who we entered a contract with, just those two individuals, or do we enter into a contract with Jacobs, and who were the primary signers of that contract, if there was one?
I'm going to defer the specifics of the contract, obviously, to your legal team, but I can tell you, based on the letter that I have, the signatory at the bottom is Rudy Fernandez, who is here in person today.
Okay, and Rudy Fernandez has what role in this process, sir?
He is the project manager overseeing this project, and the individual, Dr. Chandra Mysore, is the PhD, and he serves as the technology director over water and wastewater for the firm, and he actually conducted the process that went into the report.
Okay, so these two individuals are the only two individuals that you've ever had contact with Jacobs Engineering?
That is correct.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. All right, City Attorney.
Yes, sir.
I got the same phone call. I'm fine. We ready to proceed?
Legally, you are, sir.
Okay, very
Yep.
good. Presentation, please. Just hit the, you got the podium still on.
I think we're still good. Yep. So as I mentioned, the two individuals here from Jacobs Engineering Group, first is Dr. Chandra Mysore, and he serves as the technology director of water and wastewater. And Rudy Fernandez is the project manager who helped to oversee this process. And so I will turn the floor over to them.
Sir?
Good evening. Given that I'm the project manager, I guess I should just open up the presentation. Dr. Mysore did all the heavy lifting for this work.
Excuse
as a
me,
project.
excuse me one moment. Glenn, could we have the lights on the speaker, please?
Oh, no.
No, we want to be able to see you. Glenn, the lights here, please. Go ahead, we'll get the lights.
Yes. The project actually had just three of us work on it. Dr. Mysore did all the heavy lifting. This is his.
Could you pull that mic closer to you, please? Thank you.
There we go. He's the technology leader in the Southeast for this kind of work. Brenda Rivera, who's actually a resident of Pembroke Pines, did the field work. She's an engineer collecting the samples. And then as a project manager, I made sure that the company process was followed in terms of the quality of the work, the checking of the work, and so on. So my office is up in Palm Beach Gardens, and if you have any questions concerning the project or the company, I'm more than happy to answer those either today or anytime after today, too.
All right, Vice Mayor, you have a question? Yes, you do.
Oh, the mic.
Just to speak.
Got it.
There you go.
Hi.
Yes, sir.
The Commissioner Auditor made a comment before. I need you to be crystal clear about this on the record. Is there anything at all about the report, the way it was presented, the way it was written, the way it was researched, anything whatsoever that would create any sort of bias, that there was any interference, that there was anything at all that would cast doubt on the integrity and the professional truthfulness of what we're about to hear?
The answer is no. There's nothing in there that should be doubted upon. I'm a professional engineer instead of Florida, so it's my license at stake.
It is.
I'm sorry?
It is.
It is, yeah. There's absolutely no interference from the company. I had no idea. I got the same email this morning. I had no idea that this was in the works.
Okay.
So this was just another project for me and for the team.
So this is the truth.
That is the absolute truth.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's proceed.
All right, with that, let me introduce Dr. Mysore for the summary of our report.
Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening.
Could you introduce yourself for the record, please?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Chandra Mysore. I work as the technology director for Jacobs in the water and wastewater treatment discipline. And I actually worked on the report. Like Rudy mentioned, I did most of the heavy lifting. I worked on numerous disinfection byproduct projects all around the country. And I worked on a recent project in Missouri and also in California and so forth. So what I'm going to do today is going to give you an overview of what the report contains, just distilling some of the important terminology and important things in the report in a very simple terms. And just to add on to what Rudy said, I'm also a water industry professional. I've been in the industry for more than 30 years, and I'm looking at it, the water quality and the operations from an unbiased, view. So, and I also have a PE license. So just like Rudy, I'm also, concerned about that. So if that's okay, should I go ahead with the presentation?
Sure.
Okay.
Put the PowerPoint up, please.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the name of the report is Disinfection-by-Products Compliance Study. We were engaged in May to look at the DBP issue the city had faced in November. And so a report was released last week. And I'm just going to highlight some of the important things in the report. Okay. All right, so here is an outline of my presentation. I'll start off with some background. I know disinfection byproducts are not something you hear every day, so I just want to make sure that folks who are new to this understand what this is about, and then talk about some of the objectives of the report, and then what the scope of work, what was the Jacobs scope of work, and then what we found through our findings. I'll summarize that. And some of the recommendations we made as what the city should and CH2 should be looking at. So essentially in water, natural organic matter, which is present in the water both in surface and groundwater sources. In this particular case, the source water is Biscayne Aquifer for City of Pembroke Pines water treatment plant. And the organics are known as natural organic matter, and it's quantified as total organic carbon. So the total organic carbon is a sum of two organic carbons, one that is present on the particulates and one is in the dissolved fraction or the dissolved matter. So you have total organic carbon, which is comprised of particulate organic carbon and dissolved organic carbon. And natural organic carbon can be in surface waters, it can be from leaves, and it can also due to algae. So essentially, most of the water treatment plants in the US use a disinfectant. Almost all actually use a disinfectant, either chlorine or ozone or chlorine dioxide or sometimes UV. But what I'm showing you here is like the disinfectant. The primary purpose of using a disinfectant is to make sure there are no microbial constituents in the finished water when you drink. So. But a byproduct of this disinfection is that when the disinfectant can also combine with the natural organic matter or the organic carbon to produce disinfection byproducts. So that is what happens in water treatment. And so the balancing act is you want to make sure that you have enough chlorine in your water so that you inactivate all your microorganisms. But at the same time, you also want to make sure the disinfection byproducts are kept under a certain level. And I'll get into that in a minute, what the regulations are. So in 1974, Congress passed the Safe Drinking Water Act, and it authorized the US EPA to look at, set certain maximum contaminant levels for certain contaminants. The primary goal of this is public health protection. You want to make sure that nobody falls sick. So the EPA has set standards for disinfection byproducts, and for some reason, I'm not able to see this. I'm having some problem with the slides here, where it's just showing the pathogens, but the disinfection byproducts. But the disinfection byproducts are two classifications. So you have total trihalomethanes and the haloestic acids. And so many of you must have heard of total trihalomethanes. But why do we call it as total trihalomethanes is because predominantly there are 4 species, which is chloroform, bromoform, dichloromethane, and dibromochloromethane. And then we also have haloestic acids, which is mono, dry, and trichloroestic acid. So we have 5 of those, and mono and dibromoestic acids. So on your right side is a table that shows the limits that are set by the EPA. Now the EPA sets those limits and then delegates it to the state agency, which is the Florida Department of Health in this case. I'm sorry, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, which then gives Florida Department of Health to set these limits and regulate those limits in the drinking water. So for total trihalomethanes, the maximum contaminant level, because the drinking water industry is full of acronyms, so pardon me for that, and I will be happy to stop and explain, but MCL is what is normally used, which is maximum contaminant level. And what that means is in your drinking water, you should not have total trihalomethanes more than 80 micrograms per liter and haloestic acids more than 60 microgram per liter. And the way that regulation works is based on what is known as the locational running annual average. And this started with the stage 2 disinfection byproduct rule. That's what the stage 2 means here. And it's computed based on a locational running annual average. So if you were to just follow these, for example, in your distribution system, there are 4 sampling locations, just an imaginary distribution system here. And if LO represents one of those points in your distribution system, so every quarter you measure the THM. So let's say this is the first quarter, then the second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter. So in a year, you have 4 quarters. So then you divide that by 4, and that is the locational running annual average. And each of those locational running annual averages must be below the maximum contaminant level. So whether it's total trihalomethanes or haloestic acids, they have to be below the maximum contaminant level. And the maximum contaminant level for total trihalomethanes is 80 micrograms per liter, and for haloestic acids, it's 60 micrograms per liter. So that is the law, okay? And so then I'm just going to do a quick overview of the City of Pembroke Pines water treatment plant. We were engaged and we did a site visit on May 2nd, I believe it was, if I remember correctly. And I'm just going to go very quickly. It's a lime softening plant. Like I said, the source water is Biscayne Aquifer. We have different wells, like the central well field and the eastern well field, and they all go.
Doctor, let me interrupt you if I might. You don't have to go quickly.
Oh, okay,
So
sorry.
just take your time. It's something we want to thoroughly understand,
Oh, I see, okay.
and
all right.
we're not experts like you are.
Sure,
So if you could just,
sure.
Yes.
I
Please
just
don't go
wanted to
quickly.
make sure I have enough time to answer questions, because a lot of the technical jargon
it's not a problem,
may not be
Doctor.
interesting, so.
Doctor, not a problem, just not too quickly.
All right, okay, no problem. So if I have the time, so then essentially we have the central well field and the eastern well field, and so we have these Biscayne Aquifer, and then we have the oscillators, which are, coagulation, flocculation, sedimentation to remove the turbidity, organics. Then, several chemicals are added. Then you have the green leaf filters, which filters out the turbidity and part of the organic carbon. And the portion of the water goes through ion exchange. And now the ion exchange units were being rehabilitated since September 2015. So I'll get onto that in a minute, how that might have impacted the water quality. But the ion exchange units are back online now. So that is, from what I know, when we were toured the facility, the ion exchange units were being rehabilitated. But I think in the last 1 or 2 weeks, they have been back online. And so then what the ion exchange unit does, it removes the organics. So the Biscayne Aquifer is high in organics. The organics is measured by color as well as total organic carbon, which we call it as disinfection byproduct precursors. So when chlorine combines with that, it forms the THMs and HAs. So you want to have as low as these organics as possible in your finished water. So that's what the ion exchange unit is doing. And then it goes to a clear well where the chlorine is added for disinfection along with ammonia. So City of Pembroke Pines uses chloramines for disinfection. And then the water is stored, and then it's sent through a high service pump, and it's pumped into the distribution system. So that's how this water treatment plant works. And I just am showing you a map here. And the way the law works is that you have to have 6 locations. In this particular case, you have 6 locations. So the water treatment plant is here. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we have 2 storage tanks. One is academic and one is Holly here. And so the water is pumped from the water treatment plant here, and the THM HA samples are collected 4 times a year at each of these locations. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So each of these locations, the quarterly MCL, which is total trihalomethanes, is 80 and 60 have to be met. But more importantly, the locational running annual average value has to be satisfied. So if the locational running annual average is higher than 80 or 60, then the system is in violation. That's how the law works. I hope I have made that clear so far.
Very clear.
Okay. All right. So getting on to why we were engaged, that is the background I want to give. The city noticed during the 4th calendar quarter of 2016, that's in November, they noticed an increasing trend in disinfection byproducts within the distribution system. So disinfection byproducts, recall, is total trihalomethanes and haloestic acids. So they started creeping up. The locational running annual average, which is what the FDOH is looking for TTHM, at the Rose Price Park location, that is just one location, was 88.42 parts per billion or micrograms per liter, exceeding the maximum contaminant level of 80 micrograms per liter. So once the threshold is exceeded, then the system is considered to be in violation. So FDOH issued a letter saying that the system is in violation. So then that's where I think, that's where we got engaged, and we were asked to look at this water quality and come up with recommendations. So what were the objectives of this study? The objective was to assess the compliance with the current regulations, which is the stage 2 disinfection byproduct rule. That is the law which EPA is using, and that is what FDOH refers to. Review past data on disinfection byproducts, looking at the previous disinfection byproducts, how was the city doing. Evaluate operations and performance of the existing water treatment plant. How is the water treatment plant operating? Is it operating satisfactorily? Does it need any improvements? Those kind of things we were asked to do. And recommend cost-effective alternatives to minimize the DBP formation. And so coming up with alternatives or recommendations how to mitigate the DBP issue. So our scope of work, so I'll go through the scope of work one by one. And then we had several tasks. We have tasks 1 through 5, so I'll highlight each task, what we were asked to do in this, and then finally what our findings were under each of these tasks, and then finally wrap it up with recommendations. So the scope of work is task 1 through 5. The first task is to review the source and finished water quality data. So looking at the Biscayne Aquifer water quality and looking at the finished water quality data. So what we found was, except for the past 3 quarters, which is starting November of 2016, then in January, and then last one in April, the city has been in compliance with stage 2 disinfection byproducts for THMs at HAs, except for the past 3 quarters. Because if you look at the previous data, historically, they never have exceeded these values. So the exceedances that we saw in disinfection byproducts can be attributed to free chlorine burn. And what happened during November was the free chlorine burn, which is a very common system used which is a common practice used by many utilities in the US, because you want to flush the system with chlorine so that you don't have biological growth that will lead to microbial violations. So when you use that chlorine to flush the system, and right after, like a week later, when you go and pick up a sample, there is a very good chance your THM numbers will be high. And that's what happened. The THMs HA numbers were very high right after because the samples were picked after the chlorine burn. The other things that could have contributed is the DBP precursors that I showed in the earlier slides, because the DBP precursors are color and total organic carbon. And if the color and total organic carbon are there, because they are in the Biscayne Aquifer, the treatment plant is doing an excellent job. They're removing about 47% of the organics. But still, because you're starting off with a high total organic carbon, even if you remove 47%, you still have over 5-6 milligrams per liter of organic carbon in the finished water. So that can contribute to.
Let's have him do the whole presentation, then we'll ask questions, because I don't want to interrupt him.
I'll forget. But no, it's on point. It's on.
All right.
If I may.
Okay. Yeah, hit the mic, please. Hit the mic.
I'm sorry.
And let this be an exception, because I want him to get through the whole thing. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Just, could you explain why the free chlorine burn would cause I'm not sure I understood your explanation.
Yeah, typically what happens is high doses of chlorine are used to flush the system. And when you use a high dose of chlorine to flush the system, when you have organics in the water as well, these two react and you can form high THMs and HAAs. Because in fourth quarter, if you look at the data for fourth quarter, the THMs and HAAs were high at 3 locations. And those 3 locations, yeah.
Well, then how long would it take before that chlorine would not interact, so to speak, and cause a higher number?
It all depends on the system. Maybe it may take a few weeks to really flush the system, make sure the water stabilizes, check the chlorine residual, it has returned to what it should be. Typically, the chlorine residuals, according to regulations, should be below 4 milligrams per liter. So I don't know what the numbers were at that time, but this is a very common practice utilities use. But what happened is the sampling event happened right after the chlorine burn. If the sampling event had happened a few weeks later, a month later, maybe we would not have seen these results.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's all right. Go ahead, sir. Hit that podium again, please, the mic. Just hit the mic and the podium. Speaker mic. Push the button there, please, to speak.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So then the third thing is the water age, because I think I would like to do a little quick back here. So here, if you see here, these are the 3 locations where the high THMs and HAs were noticed. So this is, when you look at the map, the water treatment plant is here, and these locations are here. So as the water travels too, if the water is, especially at the Rose Price product location, if the water is not used constantly, the water sits in the system. And as the water sits in the system, the reactions keep continuing between chlorine and the organics. And as the reactions keep continuing, they can have a higher numbers that you can see. That's one of the reasons, that's why we are seeing that. So the water age plays a very important role. So these are some well-known facts why you would have a disinfection byproduct issue, and we saw that here too. So I'm just going to show you very quickly the data. This is a little bit complex, but I'll walk through this data for you. So on the left axis is the locational running annual average, which is what we are showing for total trihalomethanes. And I'm showing here the different locations. So what it is let's ignore the green line for now. If you look at all these lines, these are the different locations, which are the different 5 locations. And so this is your maximum contaminant level of total trihalomethanes, 80 micrograms per liter. So if you look at all these lines, they are all well below the 80 micrograms per liter. Now only the green line, which is the Rose Price Park location, is the one that's showing the green line here. So if you look at this, this is the 4th quarter of 2016. So this is 2 years of data, going all the way from 2014 to present. So 4th quarter of 2016, the locational running annual average exceeded this MCO.
Excuse me, doctor. Who's talking? This is very important. I'm sorry, doctor, please.
Okay. So, so this is where the locational running annual average for Rose Price Park exceeded, and this is what caused the system to go into violation. But what is important to understand is, even at the Rose Price Park location, the 3rd quarter, which is here, 2016, you can see that data is less than the THM of 80. Only this location actually put the system out of compliance. So that's what happened. And then the next one is the reason why this is high, because I'll show that in a minute, because the quarterly averages are, the averages are based on individual quarters. So when the individual quarter, one quarter went up like 179 micrograms per liter, it starts throwing off the other numbers. So this number also became high. But the most recent data, which is 2nd quarter of 2017, the numbers were low. So you can see how it is coming down. So I'll explain in a minute, what is happening and what the special sampling event, what we found through the special sampling event. So the task 2 was look at the water treatment plant processes operations and disinfection practices. And what we found was some of these wells, like 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, 10, 11 were operational. Ion exchange units were offline. And so I think one of the major things that can affect the disinfection byproduct formation is if the ion exchange units are offline. And they have been offline since September of 2015 for a good reason, because they need to be refurbished. Now they are back online, and I'm very hopeful that when the units are back online, they will start removing the organic carbon. And when they start removing the organic carbon, the DBP numbers will decrease. So that's a very positive thing that's going to happen in the coming months. Okay, so then I want to show you a little bit about color here. So here is the finished and raw water color. And what I'm showing is the secondary standard for color, which is 15 color units. That's the bar here. And then this is the finished water color. And this vertical line indicates where the ion exchange units are offline. So this is September 2015. And you can see here when the ion exchange unit went offline, that is after September 2015, the finished water color has started climbing up. So this is, although it is climbing up, it's still below the SMCL, which is secondary maximum contaminant level of 15 color units. And then, of course, the percentage removal, because if the ion exchange units are gone, so the green dots show the percentage removal, they are decreasing. So when the ion exchange units were operational, the percentage removal was close to 65%. When the ion exchange units were offline, 95%, but it's close to like about 70%. So you can see the effect of the ion exchange units. That's what I'm trying to convey here. And then task 3 was we did independent water quality testing. And the purpose of this was to look at how, if Jacobs were to collect a sample and send it to a lab, and the city, which is CH2, who is the operator, collects the samples and sends it to another lab, how would these two results compare? And if these two results were to be similar, then we know that the city and CH2 are doing a good job and the lab is doing a good job. If they are very dissimilar, then obviously there's a problem. So we need to figure out where the problem is, if there's a problem with QA/QC or something else is going on. So what we found was, Brenda, who is here, she was the engineer who went, and actually she's a resident of Pembroke Pine too. She went down and she came and collected samples on June 12th, I believe it was, June 12th, and then CH2 staff also collected water samples. They sent it to their own laboratory, and which is also a both are state-certified laboratories, and we sent it to Eurofins, which is also a state-certified laboratory. And the results came very similar. I think for THMs, I think it's very important, the THM results were within 10 to 15%. The haloacetic acids were slightly higher, but it was only at 2 locations. Most of the time, they were in the margin of like 20% or so. So that's the good news.
Mayor?
So the good news is that the labs and the sampling procedure, there's nothing wrong in it. Everything is going fine. Because sometimes when you collect a sample, and if you don't maintain the proper temperature, then the disinfection byproduct numbers can change. But luckily,
Mayor,
we didn't see any of
I don't want to interrupt the speaker, but you said 10 to 15% of what?
Between the two numbers.
What two numbers, sir?
The THMs from Eurofins and the THMs of collected by CH2, which was
The
analyzed.
2 lab tests were within 10 to 15% of each.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Like if you compare, number differences. Yeah. Okay, so here is a map that shows the THMs. And as you can see here, these 1, 2, 3, these are the ones that had the high THMs HAs during November. But as you can see here, the Rose Price Park, which has actually put the system out of compliance, the THMs actually came out to be 45 micrograms per liter. Haloacetic acids came to be 35. And if you look at all these 6 different locations, and we even measured the THMs at the treatment plant, all of them were below the MCL of THM for 80 and haloacetic acid of 60. They were below those numbers. Unfortunately, these cannot be used as part of compliance monitoring because this is a special sampling event. And so I will show you the results of this, which is very important to understand because I think, I'm just going to show you Rose Price Park location because that's the location which is putting the system out of compliance. And so here is the 80 micrograms per liter limit. Here is the individual numbers which you had seen earlier. But this is the number which actually goes to like 179 in fourth quarter. That is what is actually throwing everything out of compliance. And so you see the blue is the locational running annual average. So this was above 80, still a little higher because of this high number, and then it's coming down. And this is what is showing as the special sampling event. And the reason why I didn't join these lines, because it cannot be considered as a compliance sample. But here is the number, which is 45 micrograms per liter. But however, if I were to compute a locational running annual average based on this number, it would be right here, just below the MCL of 80 micrograms per liter. So the the third quarter is due sometime in August, and if the numbers come out like 45, something like that, it would be below the LRAA. If not the next quarter, I'm sure it will come, because if you look at the historical data, only once in 2014, the numbers are a little higher, but if you look at somewhat similar, like seasonal effects, and if you compute the LRAA, I think it should be okay. But we just have to wait and see how those numbers turn out. So then task 4 was recommend treatment strategies to reduce disinfection byproducts and prepare a draft technical memorandum. So we are done with that, and that's what I'm presenting. And then incorporate city comments and issue a final technical memorandum. And that was done last week. So what were the recommendations we made? And these are some, I made a lot of recommendations in the report, and I don't want to cover all of them here, but I'm just going to hit on the highlights. One is starting with, what we call, I put in the report 2 types of recommendations. One is phase 1, which is a short-term recommendation. In other words, it doesn't involve a lot of capital expenditure or anything like that, but it just involves a few changes to operations, and that way you can bring the system into compliance very quickly. And so what are those recommendations? Because if you look at the whole thing from a 35,000-foot level, you got the source water, which is the Biscayne aquifer, you got the treatment plant, and then you got the distribution system. And each of these components, certain things can be done that will help to reduce the disinfection byproducts. So what I said is optimize the source water quality. What we noticed was, although we didn't do any water well sampling from the previous work done by other folks, we found that wells 3 and 5 have the very poor water quality. What I mean by saying poor water quality is they are high in organic carbon, they are high in color, and they are also high in ammonia. So what needs to be done is to minimize those wells as much as possible. So if you start off with a good source water quality, you have less treatment and less things to do in the distribution system to meet the disinfection byproducts. And where the city is that it is in this process of looking at it, and my understanding is that city is also looking at other wells of better water quality to hopefully bring it into the process, so that way they don't have to rely on these poor water quality wells. Then the second thing is, for the treatment plant, bring the ion exchange units back into service. And the reason for that is, like I explained earlier, the finished water color and DOC are removed by the ion exchange units. So if you bring them back online, the color and dissolved organic carbon, which is one of the ingredients for producing the disinfection byproducts, would be reduced as well. So that would help in reducing the disinfection byproducts. And I put a check mark here because I just learned from the city engineer, I think it was just last week or 2 weeks ago, the ion exchange units are back online. So that should start helping the treatment plant. Another thing, the third thing at the treatment plant was the treatment plant is using polyphosphate to replace the polyphosphate with carbon dioxide, but polyphosphate is used to prevent the carryover of calcium from the oscillators to the filters. But if you use carbon dioxide, then you would be able to produce calcium carbonate, and also it will go into solution, and then you would also be able to optimize the pH. So what the city is done is the temporary equipment is in place, and a permanent system is proposed for the next year's budget. So I think when they do that, that will help as well to improve the treatment. Then I continued with some more short-term recommendations. Conduct bench scale studies. In the past, some bench scale studies had been done. I noticed some deficiencies in the bench scale studies, so I said, maybe if you do it this way, maybe try this type of coagulant and polymer, and maybe give enough time, between the chemical addition that will help to reduce the color and TOC. What we found through our independent sampling is, I won't go into the technical too much, but the organic carbon is of such a nature that it can be removed much better by coagulation. Right now, the treatment plant is removing about 47%, but you can remove up to 70% if you adjust the water chemistry right with proper coagulant polymer combinations. And so this is an ongoing, ongoing activity from what I understand. And then automation, I was working on a project, very similar project in California, and now they have installed online TTHM analyzers and TOC analyzers. And what does that is immediately, in real time, you will know what is going on with your TOC. So if you see the TOC exceeding a certain number, suddenly you need to adjust your chemicals or change things in the treatment plant or bring more ion exchange units online or whatever to reduce the color and the organics. The THM also helps to know if you are going to have a problem well before, because right now how the system works is you pick a sample, like Brenda picked up a sample, CH2 picked up a sample. It's about 2 weeks before we get the results back. So by the time it comes back to you, already there's a 1 to 2 week delay. And so the reaction time also gets slowed because of the delay in the lab, the results coming from the lab. But if you have an online THM analyzer, you know instantaneously that you have a problem. And if you have a good data set, you know, okay, if my THM at my water treatment plant is, say, 50 micrograms per liter, then I know at the remote corners it may start exceeding 80. So I need to do something about it. So things like that. So I think that's also been proposed in the 2017-18 budget from what I understand. And then I recommended a hydraulic model. Currently, there's no hydraulic model. And a hydraulic model will greatly help you in improving the water age and optimizing the water quality. These are more like distribution system recommendations, and that's also in the budget from what I understand. And then, of course, the American Water Works Association recommends best management practices in the distribution system, which essentially refers to water age, how to flush the lines, unidirectional flushing, and so forth, and adding mixers in storage tanks and all that. And that is under study from what I understand. One of the findings which I did not show here in this is the THMs, like I showed earlier, is comprised of 4 species, but chloroform in your situation is the predominant species. So let's say there is 80 micrograms per liter of THMs, about 70 of that is chloroform, which is very highly volatile. So the good news is that it can be easily removed. The more volatile a compound is, the more easily it can be removed from the water. So if you add mixers in storage tanks and so forth, it can help in reducing the THMs. I have worked on many projects out west in Arizona and so forth, where these mixers and all that are being used to reduce the THMs. So then the phase 2 is like a long-term recommendation, which will involve significant capital expenditure. And since it will involve significant capital expenditure, I have to justify that too. So I'm going to talk about that in a few here one by one. This is more like a phase 2. And the reason to go to phase 2 is only if phase 1 is not successful. So I have a very good feeling that phase 1 will be successful, because with the recommendations I made and with the changes that will happen, the THMs, HAs should come into compliance pretty soon. But in the event the phase 1 doesn't work, what do we do next? And that's what this is. So this will involve capital expenditure. Right now, the filters have anthracite, but if you were to replace it with granular activated carbon, as we call it, as what we call as GAC in the industry, GAC is a well-known, best available technology recommended by EPA to reduce color and organics and other compounds as well. In fact, one of the projects I've been working in Missouri, we have recommended GAC, and they are in the process of converting their filters to GAC. Biological filtration, this is something that's happening a lot in the industry. In fact, I am proud to say 15 years ago, I worked on the Tampa surface water treatment plant in Florida. I was one of the designers, and we actually designed a 66 million gallons a day water treatment plant with biological filtration. Now it's 120 million gallons a day. And it's essentially a GAC filter which operates in biological mode, and it helps to reduce the organic carbon because the very beneficial bacteria consume the organics in the granular activated carbon and reduce the organics. They also help to convert ammonia to nitrate, which is a problem here in the drinking water, source water, because it's high in ammonia, which makes the treatment challenging. So if you were to convert ammonia to nitrate, you won't have to worry about nitrification issues in the distribution system. And then last but not the least is the decentralized treatment, which is something being very much practiced in Nevada and Arizona. And in fact, I worked on a project in Arizona just a few years ago with the city of Scottsdale. And instead of spending millions of dollars trying to fix your treatment plant, just focus on where the THM issue is. So for example, the THM issue is in the Rose Price Park location as an example. So then you would just focus on that area and then maybe just put something like air stripping towers. And in your case, the water has high chloroform, so it's very easy to strip it, and it will be very easy to reduce the THM. So this is more like a long-term solution in the event the short-term solutions don't work. So I think I have given all possible solutions. It's just that I think the phase 1 recommendations should be implemented first. And if that happens, things should be fine. So in summary, the finished water supplied by the city since the November 2016 incident has been below the 80 ppb threshold for TTHMs at all the 6 monitored locations. The high TTHM issue appears to be a temporary phenomenon. I feel that it's a temporary occurrence because if I were seeing that numbers again and again, first quarter, second quarter, then I think there is concern. But it looks like it's just only in the November, quarter, fourth quarter of last year, the THM numbers went high. And because, especially at the Rose Price Park location, which made the locational running annual average go above 80. And when LRAA is above 80, you're in violation. So that's what it is. So I think it's a temporary phenomenon. I think it should be okay once all these recommendations are implemented. And finally, the CT and CH2 are complying with all the applicable regulatory requirements. Whatever the regulatory requirements, I believe they're complying with all that. They're working with FDOH, and they're working earnestly to ensure effective disinfection while reducing TTHMs. And the reason why I say this is not unique to City of Pembroke Pines. If you look at around the country, a lot of utilities have to deal with this, and that's what I'm showing here, because trying to make sure there are no microbes, no total coliform violations, which is part of the total coliform rule, which I did not talk about, which is, this is a combination of rules, microbial and disinfection byproduct rule. I just talked about the disinfection byproduct rule. I didn't talk about the microbial rule. So the challenge the utility has to do is to make sure that there is enough disinfectant to inactivate the microbes. You don't have biological growth in your distribution system, but at the same time, you want to make sure the disinfection byproducts are below the MCLs. So this is a very difficult balancing act, and City of Pembroke Pines is not unique to this because there are many, many utilities that are facing these challenges and have faced these challenges. So to me, I think the city and CH2 are doing a wonderful job. I think if they follow all my recommendations and everything goes as planned, then I think we shouldn't see this problem.
Well, thank you, Doctor. And before I entertain questions, let me just say, wonderful presentation.
Okay, thank you.
An independent, let me clarify, an independent analysis, am I correct?
Yes.
You're from an independent source.
Absolutely. I have been in the industry for more than 30 years, worked all around the country, and I think the DBP issues which I've seen is only in the November water quality, quarter. I haven't seen that before, and I haven't seen it after. So it seems like it's just
I'm very comfortable as the mayor now to know that we were on the right road. As we've been telling the residents, an anomaly that happened, we're correcting it. Your recommendation, I'm sure our great department will go along with those. So again, thank you for your presentation. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I want to thank you for your work and for the for the
just
report.
one more slide, yeah.
Sorry?
Oh, just one more slide.
Oh, go right ahead.
Yeah, that shows the report that was submitted. as
Oh,
well.
questions and comments, perfect. Perfect timing.
Oh, okay, Vice Mayor, go ahead.
There you go, okay.
I just forgot about the last slide.
No problem.
Thank you. That makes it official, right. I want to thank you for your work and for the report that you wrote and for the PowerPoint presentation. Now, you and I agreed in very different areas, so you'll forgive me if I don't say it exactly correct, but I need you to sort of try and follow this from a civilian's perspective
Sure.
To your industry as to whether or not I'm stating this right. When I read your report and when I listen to you speak and when I've heard the staff, I've asked them the question, going back to when we received the violation, why did this happen? And at first they weren't sure, but about a week or so later they came to me and they said, we're pretty sure that this was an anomaly in the way the test was taken. In other words, typically, after a burn, you wouldn't have your water test immediately scheduled. And because this fire hydrant is at a dead end in the sense of it does not loop to anything else, you had a concentration of TTHM
Right.
that was there. Further exacerbating this, I mean, tell me if I say it wrong or if I'm totally off base. I need to know the truth. The
Sure,
folks want
okay.
to know the truth. So further exacerbating this is the fact that the system appears not to have been flushed before it was tested. In other words, all of that material was there, the hydrant was open, and it was taken. The sample was taken. Correct so far?
Yes.
Okay, so as a result of that, the test was improperly taken. Had they flushed this location, and had they then taken, and had they done the test at the proper time, they feel that it's unlikely that you would have come up with this number. It should have been a number closer to the range of where everything else was in the city. And the reason they said that to me, and I want to hear what you have to say. The reason they said that to me is because it makes no sense that the water in one particular location only should be that far off the water quality level of everything else, because the water comes from the same place, which is sort of like the plant. Is that about right? Is it your impression that this violation basically resulted from a poorly taken test?
Yeah, okay, yeah, let me say a few things. I mean, yeah, if I may. Yeah, I think this graph is the key graph. So what you see here.
Hold on.
Hold on a second. Glenn, can we get that graph up?
Not working?
What graph is it,
Oh,
Doctor?
it's in the PowerPoint presentation.
I know, but which
He's
one
putting
is
it
it?
back up now.
Oh,
There we go. Is that it?
yes, that's the key graph.
Okay.
So a couple of things. Okay, I mean, if you see here, this is 178, okay? So if you look at the previous number, which is this, which is the third quarter of 2016, that's somewhere like 65 or something like that, I think. So yeah, it's between, so it's 70 is right here, so it's somewhere, it's close to 70, maybe 65, 66. And I have the exact numbers, but that's what it is. And so if you look at the next quarter, it's also about the same. So this is the only data point that is having this problem. So obviously it is a flushing issue. But there is also another thing. There were other two locations, which I have to mention here, which also had high THMs and HAAs, but not so much, not so high as this number.
And is that because those tests were also taken too close to the burn?
It is possible, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
typically you do not want to sample right after a chlorine burn because the chlorine doses are very high.
So under any set of circumstances, the date on which the samples were taken relative to the dates of the burn, that was just incorrect.
Yeah, I would say so. It's just the timing of it. I would say it was,
Okay.
It's
And
bad timing.
that's
yeah.
essentially what caused this anomaly in your view?
Right, because, if you go back
right,
to
so-
this curve, you never see anywhere those type of numbers.
Okay,
Yeah.
so throughout this process, both before and after, and you took these tests and you've looked at the data, and even during the time that we were in violation, did you form any impression that the water quality, from a health perspective in Pembroke Pines, was unsafe to consume?
Yeah, except for this, yes. If you leave these out, yes, no. I mean, if you look at all these numbers, this is all fine. It meets all the LRAA and the values. It goes by LRAA. The law goes by LRAA.
But was the water unsafe, is my question?
I wouldn't say no. I mean, it
don't
was not
understand.
unsafe. Yeah.
It was not unsafe?
Yes.
So it was safe?
Yes, but
Right.
again, safety is also a very subjective, thing because,
Well, how would you define it?
okay, for example,
Was it safe to drink?
somebody is okay to eat peanuts, but somebody is not because they're
Because they're
allergic to it.
allergic, right.
So when it comes to water, if I may be okay, but there could be an infant or a pregnant woman or a immunocompromised person. For them, it may. So the best person to answer that question is the physician.
And that's what we
in my
said right
mind.
away.
Or the
And
local
that-
health
and
department.
that's what we
Yeah.
told people to say. But,
right.
Yeah.
but generally speaking, I mean.
Generally speaking, it
this-
is
Is this
okay.
water making people ill?
I would no, I wouldn't say so.
Okay. So my next question is, the system that we have at the water treatment plant, which is coagulation.
Yes, coagulation, flocculation, filtration, sedimentation, filtration, and ion exchange.
The
Yes.
suggestion was made that the suggestion was made that this system isn't a best practice. The suggestion was made that this is a substandard and not respected way of treating water. Is that correct?
No.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, because when I look at the finished water quality, because the finished water quality meets all the drinking water standards. I mean, even color, for example, even with the, let me explain that in a minute here. So even if you look here, the secondary maximum contaminant level for color is 15. So even with the ion exchange unit gone, when the ion exchange unit, if you go left, the ion exchange unit is operating. So look at the color values, they are very low. But if you go right, which is when the ion exchange unit stopped operating, the color has climbed, but it's still around or below 15 color units.
And that's very persuasive, but I just want to press this. The suggestion was made that the city was somehow deficient in maintaining a water treatment system using this modality because it was not a recognized best practice.
No.
Is that correct?
No, because many groundwater plants use the same system. In fact, many groundwater plants don't even use so many processes that you use. In fact, they don't even have an ion exchange system to reduce the color.
Right. So what you're suggesting is some improvement or some change in what chemicals or the types of chemicals that we use to produce the water for effect that would reduce TTHMs and disinfection-by-products, but that you're not recommending a wholesale change
No.
of the water treatment plant system that is currently there.
That's right. I'm not recommending any advanced treatment like membranes because I
Okay.
don't see it's necessary at this point.
Okay, I just have a few additional questions. Do you feel that west of I-75, where even during the normal, let me call them, period of time that we've got data for, the readings seem to be just a little bit high? There is a feeling in the community that that's because of the distance between the water treatment plant and the homes that far west, and also because the density in the eastern part of our city is such that they use much more water, so much more water is flushing through the pipes, so the pipe is clean, so the water is cleaner. But out west, where there's less usage and there's more density, the water ages more. Are you recommending any other sort of capital improvement out west to sort of polish the water or to treat it additionally before it's delivered to homes? Or is it your recommendation that we just follow what you've been saying very clearly and just do that and not take any other steps?
Actually, I did not cover all the recommendations that I made in the report because the report is about 70 pages. It's
Yes.
very detailed.
It is.
And makes very detailed recommendations. One known method to reduce DBPs is to loop the system as much as possible, so that way you reduce improve the circulation of water.
Right.
So that's something, these are all recommended by American Water Works Association as best management practices. So those are all.
But are you recommending like a secondary plant or some sort of I say polish because that's a word that they're using. I'm not exactly sure what that means. But are you recommending some interim step out west where the water can go through, get an additional cleansing before it's delivered to the many homes out west? Are you recommending that?
We did that in city of Scottsdale, but I didn't recommend that specifically here because I thought there are cheaper alternatives. But you could actually put a granular activated carbon system out in the distribution
So if
system.
if we continue to see unusually elevated numbers, even if within standard, and by the way, I like that you came up with some lower standards for us, which mean better, by lower, I mean better water quality.
Yeah.
Unless we see those elevated, you're not recommending anything else?
No, I don't, because I think this is a temporary issue. If that's why I have this phase 2 long-term recommendations. If the problem persists and the short-term recommendations, which are, in phase 1 does not help, then you go into this phase 2, which is the long-term recommendations, which is, you could actually, put granular activated carbon, replace the anthracite media in the treatment plant and put GAC. But if the concern is in the extremities of the distribution system, you have several options. One is, of course, what we did in Scottsdale, which is looking at, we did pilot studies. One thing I forgot to mention here is anything you want to proceed, which involves significant capital expenditure, you should start logically through bench and pilot scale studies, then to full scale, because that way you know for sure it's going to work. Otherwise, you would put a several million dollar system, and if it doesn't work, it defeats that purpose. So what I said is air stripping towers are a lot cheaper, but City of Scottsdale, like granular activated carbon, each utility has its own preference in terms of treatment and so forth. But they prefer GAC. So we did actually pilot studies with granular activated carbon as well as air stripping towers in Scottsdale. And we could do the same thing here and figure out which works best. But at this point, I don't see a need for
Your microphone. Please hit it again. Thank you.
Yeah, at this point, I do not see a need for it, but it can be done if needed.
Look, so to wrap up my question, if a statement was made along the following lines that City of Pembroke Pines was issued a violation that appears to be related to a testing anomaly in one of the far west fire hydrants location, the testing protocols were not followed properly. It appears to be more of a testing anomaly than a commentary on the quality of the water plant. The water plant that we are, a methodology that we're using is absolutely acceptable. And at no time was there any evidence that the water was unsafe or unfit to drink. Would you agree with all of those things?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Schechter.
Dr. Mansour, what is, in your opinion, what are best practices in this field today
Best practices
for water treatment?
Oh, best practices are, we discussed this, membranes is a possibility.
Well, let me just qualify that for a moment. In regard to effectiveness and cost.
In regard to what?
Effectiveness and cost.
Oh, effectiveness and cost. Okay, yeah, what I did, okay, now I remember, in the treatment, in the report, I actually put on different technologies and what how much it would cost, a qualitative comparison, because we were not asked to develop a quantitative comparison, but it was just a qualitative comparison. So I put down GAC, magnetic ion exchange resin, which is a little bit different than the ion exchange resin that you have, but it specifically targets, organics. And some utilities here in Florida have implemented the magnetic ion exchange technology to remove organic carbon. And the next step is membranes. So you can go to something like nanofiltration or a reverse osmosis, but the cost would be phenomenal.
Okay, so to reiterate what Vice Mayor asked you, is our system effective and from a point of view of quality water as well as cost?
I think so. It is fine. I think right now the system, because again, I think this is where the catch-22 situation is, because the catch-22 is here with this locational running an annual average, and since our special event sampling showed that if the numbers are around 45, then your LRAA would be below 80. So which means there is no problem after that. And now that is the only thing that's holding everything here. But the rest of that, everything is fine. There's absolutely no problem. The treatment process is fine. If you want, you can go to membranes, which is going to be a very giant leap from the treatment, from a treatment perspective, because the cost is going to be phenomenal. But one of the things I've recommended is to do a long-term master plan. A long-term master plan will identify which wells are good here in the area, or maybe use some different source water, so that way you have a water which is good in quality to begin with.
Yeah.
So that way you don't have to invest too much in the treatment part of it. But then again, everything you have to do what you call as a business case evaluation.
Okay, one
Figure out
last
which-
question.
yeah.
One last question. The color of the water really doesn't affect any of the disinfectant byproducts.
It does.
It does?
Yes,
Okay.
because this color and organics are considered, which is TOC, as precursors of disinfection byproducts. So the lower your color or the lower your TOC, I like to use TOC because I come from a science background. I like the total organic carbon, because the reason why I like total organic carbon is if I know my water has, say, 5 milligram per liter of total organic carbon, for a certain water quality, I can develop how much THMs it will form. I can sit in the lab, develop, add different doses of chlorine, measure it over different days, and then I can come up with a model, and then I can say, hey, if I have 5 milligram per liter of carbon, my THM is going to be 70 or 60. So if my carbon is going to be 6 milligram per liter, my THM will be 80 or something. So I better be careful, I need to bring down. Color is very subjective, and it's not a very good parameter, but organic carbon is a much better parameter.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Seipel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very technical at points, but I think that you were able to present it in such a way that I hope it's going to be very explanatory to our residents. I have a couple of just comments and perhaps maybe a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
While this was probably one of the most serious issues that we've had, that I can remember that we've had, that took on a citywide face in my time that I can remember, it was very serious because our residents were, rightfully so, very concerned about reports that they were being given. We all have our own opinions as to those reports, whether they were factional or whether they were sensationalized. So I won't go any further on that. But a couple of comments. I like you referenced several times during your presentation coming up with a long-term master plan. And I think that that is something that we seriously need to look at, not only for any of the changes that would be made or for any changes that would be made, that they would be in place to help us with a cost efficiency,
Yeah.
and to ensure that nothing like this would occur again. And again, that's your reference to some automation on warning signals when you start to reach certain levels as to why things are moving up, and you can have a more quick response right at the plant to deal with those. So I think I really was intrigued by that, and I hope that we do go forward looking at that part of it.
Yep.
I have to say it again, we've said it a bunch of times up here, and not making light of the fact that we did have a bad reading. But again, there's been different terms used for it. Temporary phenomenon. To me, that explains it all. It happened one time. We have no records anywhere of this happening ever, ever.
Right.
So not that it should have ever happened, but it is part of what did actually happen. And that particular Rose Price fire hydrant, I think it's important yet again to say that it was a dead end, that no one was getting service from that water.
Right.
It's my understanding that city manager is looking at doing something with that, with some, I think what you mentioned, doing some looping and some other that, so that we keep that water flowing and that it's not a dead end. So I think that's a pretty smart move right at this point to do that.
Right.
Again, the one location tested not good. But at the same time, the other locations were testing okay. And I think, again, that's an important, when we talk about, and you've answered many times tonight the question, is our plant doing what it's supposed to be doing? Are we providing water? And you've said yes, in your own terms.
Yes.
Each time.
Yeah.
So the one thing I do want to bring up, and Vice Mayor did bring it up, and I noticed it in your, one of your graphs here, the west end is starting to slightly trend a bit higher. They're still within acceptable ranges, well within acceptable ranges, but there is that trending, and I think that when you're looking at something like this, again, the trending is very important to start looking at as to why.
Yeah.
So I would like to see that city manager and our staff, we start taking that into consideration, and if we are truly going to look at this, what you call the long-term master plan, that we get answers to that and we make sure that that is not a problem, or that it is a corrected issue before it becomes a problem for anybody. You did mention something about airstripping towers at Rose Price Park. Could you explain that a little bit? I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can explain that.
Is that kind of like a booster on that end of town, sort of?
No, well, okay. I'm just trying to, okay. I'll give you some background. I mean, City of Scottsdale, I was working for City of Scottsdale as a consultant several years ago. In fact, I presented a paper at the Florida Water Resources Conference just 3 months ago on the work we had done. And I also presented initial
I don't think
work
anybody can question your credentials.
at the
I don't think so.
annual conference. But the point I want to make is, out in the West, when they look at the THM speciation, the first thing you do is look at the THM speciation. And if you see chloroform, which is very volatile, and it goes by the Henry's law constant. So if the Henry's law constant is certain number above, that means that compound is not going to stay in the water. It's going to move out of the water. So in particular case of City of Pembroke Pines, including the samples that we tested and the others historical data, when I started going through that, chloroform is 85% or more than the THMs. What that means is, let's say your THM is 60, about 50 micrograms per liter or more is chloroform. So it's predominantly chloroform. And the rest is the remainder of those 3 species which I mentioned,
Right.
That is 10 micrograms per liter. Even the second one is also very easy to strip. So what that means is so there are several ways to do this air stripping process. And the simplest thing I am thinking for Pembroke Pines is the 2 storage tanks which I mentioned, which we see here in this map, which is the Holly tank. So you see these 3 locations are the ones that experience that, and the Rose Price Park is the one that had the highest. But the Holly tanks, if we were to put some kind of mixers in there, that's what a lot of utilities out in the West, like in Arizona, especially in the Phoenix area, they have put some of these mixers, which will strip off the chloroform, and then it will help to reduce the THM. It's a very cost-effective solution. So what air stripping tower does is, which is what we were looking for City of Scottsdale, is we did pilot studies, but essentially air strippers have a packed media, and the air and it blows air and the water in counter-current directions. So the media helps
So
to
it stirs them.
provide more contact time between the water and the air.
Yeah.
And so when there is more contact time and the water is coming as droplets, it strips off the chloroform and it moves into the air, and then it goes through the air. It becomes part of the air.
And that's that air stripping.
That's an air stripping mechanism. And so you can have air strippers, and nowadays they've come up with designs that blends with the environment. You won't even know that an air stripper is next to you. You can just blend it with the environment.
And you think that the way I took it, that you thought that was might possibly be a recommendation.
That's a long-term recommendation. I'm not recommending now. As a short-term recommendation, storage tanks are
You gave us a lot of
very
options, yeah.
cost-effective solution. It will immediately strip off the chloroform, since predominantly it is chloroform, and it should bring the THMs much lower. So it's a very cost-effective solution.
Okay, thank you. But I just want you to answer this one time. We had a temporary phenomenon that happened out there. This one-time issue that happened. But after all of your studying and researching and going through all of ours, I want you to say one more time for me that you think that do you think that our process and our plant right now is providing good quality water for our residents?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and your recommendations in here were not that it was something that needed to necessarily be immediately done, but again, it was a long-term plan to look for more efficiency in how our plant is run, as well as preventing through some automation any future occurrences. of
Yeah,
what
I mean,
it-
the short-term recommendations, these are very cost-effective solutions. You can implement them, you can follow a logical, way of doing things, change the coagulant or add a coagulant polymer, see how it helps. I think there are bench scale studies being done by CH to just do more of those and figure out the optimal chemistry. That itself should help. Bringing the ion exchange online, which is already been done, that should help. So many good things are being done at the treatment plant, so that should help in bringing the
So
THMs
the
down.
ion exchange is very important.
It's
and-
very important.
And keeping the water flow going is just as important.
Yes, the ion exchange is a critical component of this process because it removes the color or organics out of the water. And the more it removes, the lesser the disinfection byproducts.
Okay, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Schwartz, wrap up, please.
Yes, Mayor, I'll take the 10 minutes everyone else did. Good. How are you doing there, Doctor?
I didn't time anybody,
I'm
Commissioner.
I'm just saying, generally
Oh,
speaking.
okay.
I'll try to make it as quick as possible.
All right.
Doctor, have we ever spoken before today?
Yes, I have.
Have you spoken
In
with-
front of a board, you mean? Or?
Have you spoken with me?
Oh,
before
no,
today?
I don't.
Have we
think
ever
so.
met each other?
I don't remember, yes.
So, okay, because there was, I think we all took an oath not to interfere with your work, and I believe that to be the case. Doctor, if the anomaly didn't happen, would there be a need to spend any additional money on new technology to provide quality water to our residents?
I don't think so. I think the short-term improvements that I mentioned will just help because any treatment plant can do improvements.
Okay.
And cost-effective improvements, which doesn't cost the taxpayer a whole deal of money, but improve the quality of water is what I've recommended. If you want to go to long-term, which is a master plan, will identify those kind of things. That is.
I'm going to try to fire some questions at you quickly.
Okay.
Long-term, give me the number of years. You define long-term as how many years?
It could be 10.
10
Plus.
years from now?
Yeah, 10 years, 10 plus.
From now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question for you, sir. The data that you collected in order to come up with this analysis,
Yes.
you worked with CH2M Hill.
Well, we worked independently because, oh, you're talking about the water samples that we collected or?
No, no, sir. Okay, the water samples were collected in June, but there was data that you reviewed prior to June.
That was provided by the city to us.
It was provided by the city. Okay,
Yes.
but was it provided by CH2M Hill or by the city?
No, it was provided by city engineer to us.
Okay, by Carl Kennedy.
Primarily, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, did you have an interview with our plant manager?
We went to the site for a site visit and we toured the plant to look at the operations and see how the units were operating and so forth.
But my question was, did you interview the plant manager?
Do you remember? Oh, yes.
I know, it's been a while, that's okay.
I mean, interview meaning, yes, we met with her and, talked about the operation, yes.
Did you interview anyone of the city manager's administration overseeing that plant manager?
City manager. I mean, I was here for the kickoff meeting, and then I met with Mr. Dodge and Carl Kennedy and others, and Riley Smith, I think, was at the meeting as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, very good. You mentioned on one of your slides that as far as the background, the fourth quarter 2016, you noticed an increase in trend in LBPs. Now, was that the spike that you were referring to, or just
In
the
DBPs, you mean?
or,
Yeah.
yes, or the general condition of results?
Because the THMs and HAs increased in 3 locations, in these 3 locations.
I want to define, this is what I'm looking for. we had an anomaly. My question is when you state that we, in the fourth quarter of 2016, you noticed an increasing trend,
Yes,
is that excluding or including the anomaly?
that includes the anomalies.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
All right, next question. The objectives that you that you laid out, how were the objectives derived? And who provided the objectives?
Actually, I wrote the objectives.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Let's see. All right. Okay. Currently, the city administration is proposing a $10.8 million increase in capital expenditure for our water, with a proposal of a 24.7% increase in water rates beginning October 1st. Do you believe this could be avoided by bench testing or also doing a more long-term plan study?
What does that cover, the capital improvements plan?
Some of them have already been installed. Others are, according to your chart, are pending or under study.
Oh, yeah, so I guess in these recommendations, I guess you're referring to.
Yes, sir.
Are you referring to these, like some of these?
Commissioner Schwartz is.
Yes, sir.
done on
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this would help certainly to make the plant operate much better.
Okay, the bar graph on page 15, Glenn, if you can go to that for me quickly.
Oh, on the report? Oh,
Yeah, page 15.
okay.
In 2015, the LRAA was between 28 and 35, and in the same quarter in 16, it went from 45 to 65. Is that an anomaly or is that a trend? Like, do we expect the same? Is it based on seasonal? Is there groundwater issues? Is there certain times a year where water tables are lower, so you anticipate more or less organics?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer when the water quality would change because, you know, we just had a snapshot of the water quality for TOC. I mean, I saw some previous reports on TOC numbers. So it's really hard because we don't have a good historical database when the TOC numbers increase and so forth. So that's a hard one to say.
Okay, same slide, sir. You mentioned, when you got to this slide, you opened it up saying that other folks, and you said the words other folks, and you referenced wells 3 and 5. Who were you referring to as far as other folks?
Which one are you?
Right here, right top of this, right on this slide, right in front of us. When you got to this slide, you said other folks, and then you spoke about the poor quality of wells 3 and 5. Who were the other folks?
Oh, others, you know, like previous people who have worked on this, previous studies. I don't recall.
Oh,
whether-
previous studies. Okay.
Yeah, previous studies by.
Unrelated to Pembroke Pines.
Pardon me?
Unrelated to Pembroke Pines when you say other studies.
Oh, yeah. No, the studies were related to Pembroke Pines, but done by previous consultants or previous entities.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
On page 24, you mentioned 70% carbon versus 47% historical.
70%.
70%, go to slide 24 for me, please, Glenn. When you were on the slide, you had mentioned that 70% carbon.
Yeah. What I mean to say is, if you optimize the water chemistry, if you get the right coagulant polymer combination through enhanced coagulation or optimized coagulation, you can remove much more carbon. Right now, with the ion exchange, right now the carbon removal is about 47%, but it can be even higher. That's what I meant.
It can be higher, but is it necessary?
It would be, because it would help to reduce the disinfection byproducts. Yes.
Okay. Now, this is what everyone kind of wants to know in the room, okay? During a chemical burn that we typically do in October,
Yeah.
is the public at risk
Is the public-
during the burn?
I don't think so. This is a common practice a lot of utilities use to, because
Okay,
Pembroke Pines
let's-
uses chloramines, and so you need to use a strong disinfectant like chlorine to flush out all the organics and
Okay.
microbial growth, so yeah.
Following that, you had said that the TTHMs were spiked as a result of the burn.
Because the samples were taken right after, yeah, I think it's one of the
And
reasons.
we may not know for 1 to 2 weeks after.
It-
typically.
It is possible, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the question again. During a chlorination burn or an improper flushing, are folks at risk?
I think the doctor answered that.
I
I'd
don't
like to
think
have the
so.
doctor answer it, Mayor.
What's that?
I'd like to hear his answer, sir.
He did. Doctor, did you answer that?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I don't think so. I mean.
Do you want to answer it again?
Yeah, this is a common practice used by utilities to, when you use chloramine, which is a weak disinfectant, they have to switch to a chlorine, which is a stronger disinfectant to flush the line. That happens all the time, and that's a necessary thing, so.
And finally, I want to thank you for your presentation, sir. The storage tanks at Holly Lake, I know them well. You can see them from 30 miles away. When you fly a plane, you go right there and make a right, and you go right to Pembroke Pines. So, know it well. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
It's a mark on-
Don't move the tanks, he won't find it home. Just kidding, Commissioner. Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay, Doctor, again, the city manager wants to say a couple of words, but again, I want to thank you for your in-depth analyzation of an issue that we had in Pembroke
Yeah,
Pines.
this is a very important issue, and like I said, city of Pembroke Pines is not unique in this. Many utilities are facing this problem.
And for clarification, none of the commissioners at this dais contacted you or the independent study, correct?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Dodge?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to address one issue regarding our capital projects. First of all, the capital projects that we have in the budget, that excess is not only in capital, it's also in operational costs. There are additional costs that we pay to others, which is not just water, that's water and wastewater. So we're going to be talking about that when we get to the budget process. But I would like, excuse me, to say one other thing. The city administration has not interfered. We've been asked for information, we've provided information. That's it. And this study was commissioned, requested by you, and it was commissioned by our commission auditor. But in addition to that, I took it upon myself, and I retained two other companies to do something very similar to what the Jacobs Company did, just to see if we would arrive at the same answer. And I can tell you, based on those other two reviews, the conclusion was almost identical to the Jacobs report. One of the individuals we hired, these were academic people, was a Dr. Paul Chaddock, who's the associate professor emeritus from the Department of Environmental Sciences, the University of Florida. He's an area supervisor at one time of public health from Westchester County. He was a commissioned officer in the U.S. Air Force, bioenvironmental engineer. He has a PhD dissertation, was modeling trihalomethanes formation in drinking water, and he's authored many publications on disinfection of byproducts. And his conclusion was very similar in that where he talked about the high TTH readings obtained at the Rose Price Park was very uncharacteristic of past readings at the site and for all other sites during the sampling period. And many of his comments were very, very similar. There was another doctor that we retained who is an associate professor from the Florida Atlantic University, and he's currently president of a public utility management planning company. He's a certified water treatment plant, and he came to the same conclusion that the city had a bad sample for TTHMs. One sample is not an emergency situation, does not indicate public health is at risk. The problem was likely caused in part by an improper sample point at a fire hydrant. So I just want to point that out, that not only did your independent consultant arrive at these conclusions, we also obtained two other opinions, and those two were identical.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Okay, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Jacobs. Thank you very much. All right, let's go right to our next presentation, our